fairly collectivized today, but with me right now is Amanda Maxim. Amanda, how's it going?
I'm doing all right. It is two though, so that's more than one, which I think is a collection. Well, actually, I don't know. What's the definition of a collection?
I think this is like pair, right? So
Okay, so
is
it's
is
the
is
Thursday pair.
pairism a species of collectivism? I don't know.
So,
Well, uh, that's fine. We have more than enough brain power to run through what I wanted to cover today, which is there's this series on YouTube by Wired Magazine where they'll get like different celebrities to come on and they have like the most Googled questions about them. And so, like, you'll have the cast member of Stranger Things and it'll be like, where does Max and then live, eat, just random stuff like that. And it's a really fun kind of dumb series, and it's always intriguing to see what people Google. So I thought we could tackle some of the most Google questions about Ayn Rand and objectivism. So are you ready to jump in and help the
hey,
internet get their answers?
I'm ready. I'm ready.
Well, the first question is, I think, pretty obvious and unsurprising, but it's something that I think we have to address, and that is, did Ayn Rand write Harry Potter? Now,
Oh, wait, that's true, right? She did.
I don't know what to make of this. I mean, I guess like maybe female author, popular book,
Yeah.
but I'm scratching my head on even like how this comes about, because you have to imagine that a person who's Googling this is interested enough in books that they want to find out who wrote something, yet clueless enough that they confuse living, well, we'll come to that, living author J.K. Rowling, British author J.K. Rowling, author of children's fantasy books J.K. Rowling, with 20th century novelist philosopher of non-fantasy Ayn Rand. Do you
It's
have a
cute.
hypothesis?
Do I have a hypothesis? Uh, did Ayn Rand write Harry Potter? Like, why would that come up in someone's mind? I don't know. It's a it's a book written by a lady. I don't know. People are weird. The internet is weird.
Fair enough, but there are some kind of decent questions. So here's one, which is fair enough. You might, if you think that maybe Ayn Rand wrote Harry Potter, and you find out as you Google that no, she didn't.
She didn't. Okay. Well, what
You
did she
might
write?
then go on to Google, what is Ayn Rand known for?
Okay. Yeah, that's legitimate.
Well,
It's
what
a
was
good
she known
question.
for, Amanda? Give us
Uh,
give us our
what
answer.
what was she known for? She was a novelist and a philosopher, known for like her how like a characterization of man as a heroic species, and in terms of personal stuff about how you could be the captain of your own ship, and that you could make your own soul, and that's how I would put it.
Yeah, and I mean, I would just specify her most famous novels were The Fountainhead, which was published in 30, or I'm sorry, I'm forgetting, 41, maybe 42. Um, anyway, the 40s, and then Atlas Shrugged, which was published in 1957. And I mean, today, Atlas Shrugged is her most famous novel, but it was The Fountainhead that made her famous. And I mean, she had written a novel before that, We the Living, which is incredible and heartbreaking. And she had also been in Hollywood for a long time and wrote several screenplays, some of which were turned into films. And after Atlas Shrugged, went on to, as you mentioned, elaborate on in nonfiction the kind of philosophy that she had laid out in Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead. And we'll have more to say about the content of that. But that's sort of like the general highlights of, why is she known? Why is she talked about? I'm going to lump together a few just kind of biographical ones from her early life. Where was Ayn Rand born? Where did Ayn Rand grow up? Where did she go to college? I actually had to look that one up. I didn't know what it was called, but I figured it was like the main university in St. Petersburg, Russia, which should probably give away where did she grow up. And then where did Ayn Rand live? And so I'll just say a few words about her early life. Yeah, so she was born in 1905 in Tsarist Russia and lived in St. Petersburg at the start of the Russian Revolution, and basically spent her time growing up living under the tyranny of the early communist state until thankfully she was able to escape at the age of 21, where she came to America and then lived here thereafter, mostly in New York, but in Southern California for a time. So that's kind of the general sketch for her life. She did go to the University of St. Petersburg, as I mentioned, and studied, because this is another Googled one that I forgot to mention, but she studied history. Now that's interesting. I mean, do you know the reason why she chose to study history? Because you think she knew she wanted to become a fiction writer from a really early age. And yet when she had a chance to go to college, she did not study fiction. She didn't study anything related to literature. Why history?
Well, so my guess is, or if I wanted to be a fiction writer and I chose to get a degree in or study history, it would be because that's the story of mankind, right? It's laid out over multiple generations, many years. You can see big trends and what's happening. And I bet there's also a lot of really interesting smaller stories within the bigger story of people doing cool heroic stuff in the face of tyranny, or just like the history of invention. I would learn all sorts of stuff about people, which is ultimately, if I'm writing fiction, that's what I'm interested in. But I don't know.
And you're totally right that it was very much tied to fiction. So her view was, I'm not going to learn anything about how to write fiction from a dumb university course. Those are my words, not hers. But her whole goal in writing fiction, or her fundamental goal, was to present what she formulated as her vision of the moral ideal, or the ideal man. And then the question that she asked herself is like, well, how am I supposed to say what people should do if I don't know what they have done and what the results have been? And so she understood that like the thing that she needed in order to be able to really formulate an ideal, a moral ideal and an ideal society later on would be like, I need to look at the kind of experimental laboratory of humanity. And that is history. History is where we see like, what are the effects of different ideas and institutions and, different ways of life. And that is going to be the kind of raw material that you use then to formulate a worldview. And
yeah,
I think
you see all sorts of cool stuff that emerges from that, right? It's like people didn't have government, and then they had government, and like what was the effect of that? How did that happen? What was good about that? What was bad about that? What did people try? No, it's good.
Yeah, and I think she also had a fine-tuned sense of what subjects had been corrupted the most and which had been corrupted the least. Because I mean, we think of all right, the communists take over and they control everything, but it was a long process before you basically get everything turned into pure propaganda and kind of the destruction of any remnant of what's good in the humanities. And I think her view was that in her time you could still learn a lot about history. And of course, I mean, she was sensitive to the fact that you have to be on the lookout for propaganda. One really interesting thing that I think people haven't explored enough about Ayn Rand, and I mean scholars here, is she had this comment once, I think in her biographical interviews, where she credited a lot of her thinking ability and her ability to analyze with years spent reading between the lines of Russian propaganda and trying to get at what's really going on, what really is the truth. And so she would say in like letters to friends about, I'm a very slow reader because of like, I'm used to having to go very slow and pick apart every inference, because you couldn't just take what was printed in the Soviet Union as face value. But I think there's something really profound there. And I would really like to see somebody kind of like delve into that more, because it's an interesting, I mean, if she's saying that was important in her development in terms of how she functioned as a reader and a thinker, I would like to have, I think there's probably a lot to mine there.
Yeah, I guess that's true. There's a lot to learn from how people are trying to persuade you or manipulate you versus what's the truth here. It's a lot to explore and to analyze. But yeah, it's super interesting.
All right. So, who was Ayn Rand influenced by? And you can take the first swing because there's definitely some people who she was very would stress in terms of like these were the major
Yeah.
people in her life.
I so I would say Victor Hugo. That's one I know for sure. Um, Probably some philosophers like Aristotle, maybe Nietzsche. I don't know who else.
Yeah, no, those I would say that's most of the major ones. I mean, the she put it in different ways at different times, right? Like certainly she credited Hugo as her favorite novelist. And if you read We the Living, there's a number of Hugo-esque formulations, and particularly she has this part where she describes St. Petersburg.
Yeah.
And I think she even acknowledged at various points like this was definitely influenced by Hugo because she was a young writer. It takes time to discover your own voice. um I mean, she also had a lot of other romanticists that she liked. I say a lot, but in terms of the top rank, Dostoevsky, Hugo, and Rostand's play, Cyrano de Bergerac, she put at the top of her list. In philosophy, later in life, she would put it as Aristotle was her only influence, or she would sometimes say two and a half, Aristotle, Aquinas, um, or one and a half, two and a half. Who am I missing?
Got to add it
Um,
together. Like who gets halves?
yeah. So, but Nietzsche is an interesting because he was definitely an early influence. In an influence might not even be the right word. She certainly read him a lot and admired him, as she says in the introduction to The Fountainhead, mostly as a poet who captured emotionally her view of man as heroic. But some scholars, not the best scholars, but some scholars have said like, oh, she had a Nietzschean phase when she was young and so on. But uh, her view is like she was very aware that she and Nietzsche were not like kindred intellectual spirits from very early on. In particular, she read Nietzsche's first work, The Birth of Tragedy, which she saw as an attack on reason. And from a very young age, like she was super pro reason. So you could call Nietzsche an influence. I think of him probably more for her as an inspiration, and the sense that, all right, I'm not the only thinker who valued man and the heroic, and was willing to challenge conventional ethics. But it's harder to put him as an influence. But I also think there's a lot of other you could call like not fundamental influences. One really funny thing is if you read the Romantic Manifesto, she like has this crushing critique of naturalism, which was a school of literature that was popular in the early 20th century. And like, a major representative would be Sinclair Lewis, who wrote like Aerosmith and a number of other books. Babbitt is a famous one, but there was a like a survey Ayn Rand filled out when she was in her 20s, and it asked, who is your favorite novelist? And it says Sinclair Lewis, not Hugo. And now I totally like it's, whenever you're kind of engrossed with an author in that time period, you can think, oh, they're my favorite.
Well, yeah, you're like studying them, right? You're reading through what they have to say. It's interesting enough that you want to keep turning the pages or read something multiple times. So yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, I think it's funny that I mean, it's just so interesting that like somebody who you're eventually going to criticize on aesthetic grounds, still I think was she had a real admiration for his skill. But I mean, part of what she pointed out later in life is that naturalism can be quite good in the sense that it can be very perceptive and observant about what's going on, but that it ages like the opposite of fine wine, because as the culture changes, it's like feels so dated. And if you read Sinclair Lewis, he can be really brilliant, but it's almost like history where like, this is not how people talk. This is not like how people live, but it really was at the time. So that's a few word and influences. There's probably a lot more that we could talk about there. But I mean, I think what's so striking to her about her is not her influences, but her distinctiveness in originality, which I think will come to pretty soon.
Yeah, well, like it sounds like from what you're saying, there's this difference between influence and inspiration. So it's one thing that somebody influences you, but another to be like, yeah, I got what I could from them and I learned a lot, and I'm taking things in my own direction, because that was the whole purpose of reading those things and being inspired by them in the first place.
All right, so this one you're not allowed to get wrong.
Oh.
Is Ayn Rand still alive?
Like Elvis is still alive, yeah. Okay, no, she's not still alive.
No, she died in 1982, like a month before I was born, which like yeah, I know. It would have been cool to have a little bit of an overlap. It wouldn't have done me much good, practically speaking, to have been, a baby, but I would have thought that was pretty cool. But no, she died in March, I think, of 1982. And I think she was only 74 at the time. So, I mean, she could have been not alive still today, but pretty close to today. Well, I say pretty close to today. I guess we're in the 2020s now.
I don't know why you checked the calendar lately, but it is 2022. So what, that would make her 101 years old today, right?
No, it would make her 126, 27.
Oh,
right?
she was born in 1905. Okay.
1905. Yeah. Which, I mean, it's not biologically impossible. So, and then but apparently a big question is, where is Ayn Rand buried? And that happens to be, I will not test you on this because, again, I had to look it up. It's actually a very famous cemetery in New York, Kensico Cemetery, New York. And I forget, there's some famous people buried there, but one in particular who's relevant to Ayn Rand, and I might be getting this wrong, but this is my memory, is Rachmaninoff, who was her favorite composer of classical music.
Cool. He's there too?
Yeah, so
that's awesome.
It's a very inspiring place, aside from the fact that they're not very productive anymore. So these are I think more kind of they go a little bit beyond biography to the sorts of claims that are made more to smear and discredit her, but I'll put these two together. Did Ayn Rand die poor? And did Ayn Rand live in public housing? Which the public housing one I haven't heard before, but I have heard. Did Ayn Rand? It's
similar to like Social Security or something, like the public housing. It's like, was she on the dole or something?
Yeah, and interestingly, the Social Security one did not come up in the most searched for. I'll give kind of the biographical answer, and then if you want to riff on your thoughts of like, are these questions even important? I'd love to hear it, Amanda. Okay. As a factual matter, no, she died with, in today's money, about $1 million in savings. It would have been a lot more, but she was basically kept everything in savings and, wouldn't invest. I think it was a holdover from like, look, I lived in the worst kind of poverty you could imagine growing up, and now I have cash. Like, I don't want to feel like I'm risking it without knowing what I'm doing, and I'm not going to give the time to know what I'm doing as an investor. But still, $1 million. She was never poor. She did take Social Security as was required in order to get Medicare, and the only reason she took Medicare was not because she was desperate to pay for it, although her taxes had certainly paid more than enough to cover Medicare, but it was because she was advised by people that, like, look, you could get totally wiped out and lose everything you earn if you didn't take this. And her view is that there's nothing immoral about accepting payments from the welfare state as long as you advocate for the abolition of the welfare state, which is a whole bigger discussion we could get in. But I mean, what are your thoughts about? I don't begrudge people who look these up because they've heard them, but I mean, would your opinion of like Ayn Rand change, or the value of studying her work change if, like, oh, we found out, oh, she spent 6 months in public housing?
No, like I was really happy to hear, actually. I didn't know whether she died in poverty or not. I was happy to hear that she had $1 million. I was like, yes, go Ayn Rand, because she deserved that and more. But it seems to me that maybe one of the reasons why someone might want to think that she died in poverty is because there's something tragic about that. So if it's someone you think they had bad ideas, then and they died in poverty, it's like, okay, the story is all aligned, right? And it makes perfect sense. And there's a bit of like hypocrisy that people might perceive too if she was in public housing, right? And so it might be that. Or it could be like on the positive of that, if you were like an artist and you were an amazing artist, but lots of those guys died in poverty too. It's like they weren't discovered in their lifetime. And so that is also a bit about Ayn Rand's real story as well. So I can see why people would be interested in that, or could, make that kind of a leap in their minds.
Yeah. And I mean, and look, it's relevant to thinking like a thinker's telling you advice for how to live. Do they walk the walk? Do they talk to the talk? So I don't think there's anything wrong with those questions. I do think people will make those claims setting aside that they're not true, but I think for ill motives, right? It's like, I don't want to critique her ideas. I just want to be able to say, gotcha. But I think about somebody like, what's his name? Napoleon Hill, who wrote Think and Grow Rich. Mm-hmm. And it turns out he did die basically in poverty. Despite his telling people on how they can get rich and earn wealth. And people can correct me if I'm wrong. I know at least later in life he went through periods of poverty. I don't know if he was able to kind of score one big last job at the very end. And now that's part of a whole larger thing, and that like he basically did seem to be kind of an early version of like the modern gurus who like the only way they ever made money was to tell other people how to make money. And it's not, and like he says, I learned it all from Andrew Carnegie. And I even have a whole book that, is him giving advice. And it's not clear that any of that actually came from Carnegie. Like, so like he's a questionable figure, but like, I think you can still get value out of his books apart from that, but I still think it's interesting and not irrelevant to go, well, hey, like you're giving me advice on how to make money. Like, have you made money other than by telling people how to make money? Like, that's good to know. That's relevant information. Now, Ayn Rand wasn't telling people how to make money, but she was telling people like, this is how to live.
Yeah. So you'd want her to, if everything aligned, then yeah, she would die with $1 million or more, because she would be successful at life.
Yeah. And even broader than the financial side, like, I really do think that it's a legitimate question of a person who founds a moral system. Like, were you a good person? Were you happy? Were you successful? How are your relationships with people? So I think there's, those aren't definitive. That is, you could imagine, it's hard if you're talking about somebody like fundamentally rethinking morality from the ground up and then not living up to it. But at least, there's nothing inherent in the laws of nature that make that impossible. So like having real questions about the biography and think like, okay, what is this person look? Because I always give this advice to people in terms of persuasion, which is like, if you're going to tell people how to think and how to live, and you come off as like a crackpot who nobody likes and you're a total weirdo and like you have nothing going for you in life, like it doesn't matter if you're like super eloquent, it's just not going to happen, because like the fundamental of persuading people to be like me is they want to be like you.
Yeah. And there's like a confidence that comes from that too, which is also something people can sense, even if it's not something you talk about directly.
So this one's amusing. And this is kind of like the rounding out of the Ayn Rand biographical section. Is Ayn Rand good?
Like versus evil or
or uninteresting? Oh, I don't know. But what's amusing to me is just the idea of like, so if Ayn Rand, she becomes famous for writing The Fountainhead. The Fountainhead is about this concept of independence versus what she calls second-handedism or second-handerism, about being second-handed, which is you elevate other people over reality. So like, I'm going to I'm going to conform to what others want. I'm going to make them kind of at the top of my list. Like, looking around, what do other people think, what other people say, and her view is, no, that's really bad, like that's the wrong way to live your life. And so I just love the idea of like, is Ayn Rand, do people tell me if Ayn Rand's good, because I don't want to have to figure it out for myself. Now like, look, I Google, is this show I've heard about good? So it's not, I'm not condemning the hell anybody who's ever Googled this, but I think that's pretty funny.
It is funny. Yeah. Well, also, yeah, like you said, it could be just, is she a good novelist? Like, should I pick up the book?
Yeah.
Versus, is she not evil as a person? I don't know how people mean that.
Yeah. I mean, look, we all have to use, particularly today, right? We're swimming in a sea of options. How are you going, like, what are your kind of heuristics and standards for selecting things to devote time to in a universe where there's more than you'll ever be able to get through? People you respect saying this is really good, that's not a bad heuristic.
Yeah, for sure. Or if
So
the internet says it's good, then I guess it is good, right?
well, that's why I wonder about, like, it's who are you asking, right? Like, if you think about how Google works, like what's the source of the, in fact, all right, we're gonna do this. Is Ayn Rand good? What's the first thing that comes up? That's a PBS column. This is what happens when you take Ayn Rand seriously.
Oh, that's a bummer. I don't think that's a good one, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm just skimming it. I don't know. It does not look particularly useful, but no, there. Yeah, almost all of the answers are really bad. So the first page of Google is not doing a lot to help promote Ayn Rand for the question, is Ayn Rand good? So these are more about her views, and I think we can get to some kind of interesting ones. So these I'll throw out because they all kind of go in the same category. Well, first I'll start with this one. Is Ayn Rand a philosopher? Now, we've said that she's a philosopher, but there's many philosophers who don't think she was. What's
really?
your
like, what's the bar for being a philosopher if you don't like have written nonfiction books on, like, not just one, a whole bunch of them, and laid out an entire philosophy? So I don't know. It seems like, just rationally putting feelings aside, that she would qualify, like, hands down. I mean, she also wrote novels, so maybe does that, I don't know that disqualifies someone. So
yeah, well, I mean, it's certainly other philosophers have written novels, right? Like
for sure.
Sartre wrote novels, and I mean there were others, but I think it's much more. She doesn't do philosophy the way they do, right? So today, in like professional philosophy circles, in the U.S. at least, analytic philosophy is equated with philosophy, and so it's sort of like, if you had asked a Catholic 300 years ago, like, is Calvin a Christian? Like, the answer is probably gonna be no. You say, well, how can you say he's not a Christian? Like that, because we're equating Christianity with our correct form of Christianity. But that seems like, I mean, that's an error that a proper philosopher like isn't gonna make.
Yeah, there's the same issue with like astronomers in, I don't know, 16, 17, 1800s, where if you were not a professional astronomer, like you were not at the Royal Observatory or were being paid by somebody to be an actual astronomer, it's like, yeah, you didn't have any clout. Like, you could send someone amazing results and they wouldn't believe it, or they would ignore you because you were an amateur. And I think I hope that there's less of that today, where if someone has something good to say or they make a discovery, yeah, it's acknowledged, regardless of if they're at a university or if they have a degree, or whatever the official credentials of the time are. So she didn't have a PhD in philosophy, didn't teach at a university. So, but I hope that's the old way, right, of thinking about things, and not the new way.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be fair, her view was that so-called professional philosophers weren't doing philosophy. That is, if you think about like her view of what philosophy is that it's a worldview that gives you a framework for how to understand the world and conduct your life. and that modern philosophy, certainly in her time, and I think in certain ways even today, is not doing that. It's not even attempting to do that. And indeed, system building kind of got ridiculed and pushed off the stage in the 20th century is like, no, that's not serious. That's kind of like, the old delusion that you can come up with a coherent system. And then, so, I mean, most of philosophy just like picks these little slices of what philosophy is. And it's not illegitimate to specialize. But if you think about the goal of philosophy is a system, it is a consistent framework. And her view is if you're not trying to do that, you're not actually a philosopher. You can specialize and you could say, yeah, I'm good within a system. I'm focused on ethics or something like that. Or, I'm going to focus on scientific method or something. But to, in effect, put your stake in the ground and say, thou shall not have an integrated system of ideas, her view is you've ejected yourself from the realm of philosophy. I mean, it's basically like saying, okay, we're going to do astronomy, but we can't look at the stars. It's like, that's that's kind of the point. Right? We got to figure out like what's going on up there.
Yeah. And I think, to be fair, there are like you said, there's types of astronomers, like someone who is like a gamma ray burst astronomer. It's like, that's what they specialize in. It's not that they are ignorant of the whole foundation of things, but nor is it that they know much about, I don't know, some other, stellar birth or something. They may probably know quite a lot, but you can specialize. But if you want to claim that you're like a philosopher, like on the level of like Aristotle or Nietzsche or any of those guys, then yeah, you have to have an entire system worked out. It can't just be, I figured out a smaller question within a smaller question within a smaller question.
Well, and especially because, I mean, philosophy is different from the special sciences in that the whole subject is really about the integration of knowledge. Whereas, the special sciences aren't. They're kind of carving out an area of reality. And it's like, let's figure out what's true here. And
Maybe.
part of it being an the integrating science is that all of the questions, this is Ayn Rand's view anyway, which I think is right. All of the questions of philosophy are interrelated. So like, I don't, there's some amount of this that I think goes on in science, right? Like, I don't think you can do astronomy
Absolutely.
and ignore kind of like, relativity. Like, you need to know something about
you
other
also
pieces
cannot
of physics.
ignore math.
Right. Yeah. So there is some of that, but it's, if you're doing ethics, they're presupposing a whole bunch about metaphysics and epistemology, about the nature of the world and the way knowledge works, or even the possibility of knowledge. So it's that it's not that just that you should integrate, it's that you can't carve out a piece of philosophy and it's kind of exempt it from the rest of philosophy. It's that it's not possible given the nature of the subject. So yeah, her view is, no, you guys aren't philosophers, or you're not doing philosophy. And their view is you're not doing philosophy. And this is a point Onkar Ghate has made many times, which I thought was really like, this always happens in the history of philosophy. Like most of the most famous philosophers are breaking away from the mainstream and saying, you guys are doing everything wrong. And they look at this person, say, you're not serious. And so, when you get somebody like Descartes, who's kind of rejecting the Thomist tradition, which has like a monopoly on philosophy at the time, they don't look at him and go, oh yeah, he's a philosopher, he just has different views. It's like both of them are looking at each other going, you guys are not even doing, you're not even dealing with the right subject. So she's not unique in being controversial in that regard. Yeah. So then is Ayn Rand, and these are all options that people search for: a communist, a libertarian, a capitalist, a socialist.
A communist, a libertarian, a capitalist, or a socialist. Okay. Some very different things grouped in there.
I'll let you take this one.
Well, so I actually think those are really healthy questions, right? It's at a deeper level where you want to understand who was this person, or how do I characterize them, or sort of fundamentally categorize them in terms of what was their worldview. So that's good. But she was a capitalist, yes. Although I don't know that that's the the fundamental, that's way up there in politics. But yeah, she was the best defender of capitalism that capitalism has ever known. Not a socialist, not a libertarian. I don't think she really liked those guys. And also, what was the other one?
Socialist.
Yeah, social. No, not that either. A communist.
Yeah, and I don't want to go whole into the libertarian thing because that's kind of a complicated issue, and people have commented on that. I want to make kind of a different point about this set of questions, which is, I agree with you. Like, if you're here about a new thinker, like the first thing you want to do is like, all right, like how do I orient myself and get a feel of like where are they coming from? And so you're going to try to put them in categories that you have. But long term, that is a very, or not long term. You have to recognize that if they're an important thinker or a real thinker, even, that part of what they're almost certainly going to do is challenge kind of conventional categories. They're not going to fit neatly into a conventional category, or at least their version of that category is going to be very different from something you've heard before. And so what is lazy is, oh, she's a libertarian or she's a capitalist, or I've heard of those. I know everything I need to know. No, you've maybe gotten a first hint of what you might expect. And this is going to come up more in her ethics, but it's true even in politics, which is that a real thinker is going to be challenging you to rethink your categories or to sharpen your thinking about different categories. And so what you don't want to do is like pigeonhole people. And I mean, I remember I went to the biggest philosophy conference for academic philosophers, American Philosophic Association Eastern Conference. And I went there years ago. And like, if you went into almost, or certainly a few of the workshops or like the smaller breakout sessions I went into, you'd have these professional philosophers discussing things. And all of it was sort of like, I'll just take the Ayn Rand session. It was all about kind of what of our existing categories, do we put her in? And I forget kind of what, but it would be, oh, is she a consequentialist? Is she a virtue ethicist? It'd be like this thing. We have these categories, and then we're going to try to fit her into them. But part of what philosophy is doing is questioning, like, are these the right categories? Like, is that really how you should break things up? And you lose a lot of what's vital and interesting, not just about Ayn Rand, but even thinkers you don't like. I mean, that's why when I hear like, oh, so-and-so is a Marxist. Well, like maybe, but probably that's not the most helpful way to understand them. Or even to say like, what do I know about Locke? Oh, he's an empiricist. Okay, but if that's all you've heard, like if that's what you know about Locke, you don't really get Locke, right? Like there's categorizations are helpful, but need to be kind of I would think of them as when you're approaching a new thinker, they're like hypotheses, right? And then you have to be open to revising them as you delve into that thinker.
Yeah, I guess I don't think the need to categorize things is like, that's totally human. It's where do I place this within the scheme of what it is that I know? Where does she even approximately fit? But yeah, you got to question the whole scheme. Like, what is there? Maybe I need a new category, or maybe I don't really understand, or how is she different? And that's certainly true for anyone who's a powerful thinker.
All right, just a few more, and then we're getting some great super chats from people and some questions in the super chats.
Oh, cool.
Thank you, everybody. So I'll do 3 more, and then we'll go to that. Was Ayn Rand religious?
Okay, like no. She was an atheist, but there's a sense in which she was like a spiritual person, as in she thought things were, grand and, worth living for. So I guess in that regard, you could say it was like, with quotes religious, but nope. I'd give that one a basic no.
Yeah, but let me kind of reinforce your elaboration, because in the sense of believing in God or any kind of supernatural element. It was an emphatic no, but there's a line in The Fountainhead where this guy says to the hero, like, you're a very religious man. I can see that in your buildings. And the hero says, that's true. And Ayn Rand went on to clarify it in her 25th anniversary introduction. It's what she wanted to get across was that religion had monopolized like our highest concepts for our deepest, most profound emotions, and basically for all of our moral concepts. So things like reverence,
Yeah.
worship, all of those she thought were crucial concepts that had been appropriated by supernaturalism. And she wanted to rescue them and say what they're properly directed at was the human ideal, the ideal on this earth. And so in that sense, you could say like she's religious in the best sense, which is that she believes that these are really important emotions and really important aspects of human life. And she wanted to ground them in reason in this world. And Robert Mayhew gave a really incredible talk that you can find on YouTube called Ayn Rand's Sacred Atheism, where he delves into that. But you're exactly right to hesitate, even though it's 100% true that she didn't think that there was any grounds for any kind of faith and belief in the supernatural.
Yeah.
Okay, actually, I lied. I'm only going to do one more after that, and then we'll go to questions. Why are the Atlas Shrugged movies so bad? Now, we've talked about this a little bit, I think, in the last episode. So I'll let you start.
Why are they so bad? I don't know. They just weren't interesting. It's like most stuff that gets produced is, I like them in that they reminded me of Ayn Rand's characters. It was cool to see characters being brought to life and to think, whoa, that's possible, because you read it on a page, right? And it exists in your mind. It's not the same as seeing them, people acting like a character on the screen. And in that sense, I thought, just seeing that as a possibility was really exciting to me, even though like I said, I didn't think the movies were that interesting or compelling. So why are they bad? I don't know. It's just because they're not good.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say about it, and I've only seen, I think, the first one and like 20 minutes of the second one, and I saw those, more than a decade ago. Has it been a decade? It's been a long time. Whenever they came out, and the major thing I'll say is that I don't think they understand the novels, and particularly they don't understand the characters. And I'll just name kind of one scene, which is in the novels, and this won't give any spoilers, I hope. Well, maybe it'll be a little spoiler. I'll try my best not to. In the novel, like there's a huge inner conflict by one of the heroes, Hank Reardon, where he's really struggling with this conflict between like, I want to keep my promises, including my marriage vow, and yet he's really mistreated. He's trapped in a loveless marriage, and he feels really guilty about that. And at a certain part in the novel, he has an affair with somebody he really admires and really cares about and shares deep values with. And this becomes a like dreadful conflict for him, because it's, on the one hand, I'm happier than I've ever been with this person. This was the best thing I've ever done. On the other hand, it's a betrayal of everything I stand for and every moral principle I hold dear. And in the movie, what we see is like the morning after he sleeps with this woman, like just chipper, all right, that was awesome. Like it completely, throwing away a central conflict of the novel. And so that to me is why it's bad. Like there's so much about it just not well made as a movie, but it's, if you don't get the characters at their deepest level, and you betray that, then to me it's that.
So whose fault is that? Is that the screenwriters? Is that the writer's fault, or is it the director's fault, or is it everybody's fault?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is part of what's hard about movies, is that they're collaborative enterprise, and it's very hard to have the integration that makes artwork work, particularly if you're dealing with something like Atlas Shrugged, which is so unusual and complicated. And even if you had like the most brilliant objectivist artists, trying to make it work as a screenplay would be like super challenging, because since it's a novel that really counts on being able to see inside the characters' heads over 1,200 pages, So I don't know. I grant they're trying to do something really hard, but that's a kind of mistake that you should never make. All right, so let's turn to our super chatters. Thanks again, everybody. Roland, thank you, Jonathan, for very generous donations. Roland asks or says, "What about the poor?" Interestingly, there was not like, did Ayn Rand hate the poor or something like that? And I'm sure people Google for that a lot, but that did not come up at the beginning. And I mean, my own view is that the people who claim most to care about the poor hate them. The poor is not even really a legitimate concept. It's a package deal because there's a big difference between like a hardworking person born in like Uganda and really trying to make the best of a hopeless situation, and somebody born in America and who has a whole bunch of excuses about why they can't hold down a job, and somebody who's born in America and who gets a crippling illness that makes it so that they can't work. Like, you can't put people in a category like, I don't have a lot of money, and treat them as all the same. There's so many differences among them. And what I will say is that Ayn Rand's view was that she was sympathetic to people who suffered through no fault of their own. She was encouraging of people to make the most of their lives, no matter where they started from, including people like her who started with nothing. And she had a completely negative view of people who threw their lives away and didn't make the most of them when they could have done better. And that ultimately her view is that what one should never do is sacrifice the people who have made something of their lives for those who refuse to. So I think that's a really crucial point. Robert, thank you for yours. He says, super chatters make this a proper collective. Amen to that. Thank you, Mark. Somebody typed 43 for some reason.
Oh, that's just because the Fountainhead was published in 1940.
Oh, in 43. Okay.
I don't know. Yeah, I think that was what that referred to.
I thought we were just getting random numbers now, but no, that is very helpful. Mary Elaine, would Ayn Rand have liked Harry Potter? I won't speculate on what she would have and would not have liked. One of the most interesting things about her is how much she could be surprising, not just at the most fundamental levels, but even in the kind of specifics of how she would analyze different concretes. Like, I just remember, hearing, so somebody who I think is a really interesting writer, and I'm going to go blank on his name for a minute, but he wrote the Gulag Archipelago, Solzhenitsyn, who has gotten kind of a rebirth in the last few years, in part because of Jordan Peterson has been a big fan of his work. But in any case, Ayn Rand had the kind of most like deadly critique of how bad he was. On the other hand, if you take something like Roots, which on the face of it, you'd think Ayn Rand's an individualist, and Roots was about this Black author going back and examining his heritage and then writing this epic book that was turned into a mini series. She thought Roots was fantastic and really important piece of work. And just, you can't, and she loved Charlie's Angels. So like, she's, not predictable at all. I will say I loved Harry Potter. Most objectivists I know love Harry Potter. And I think they're incredible as an incredible achievement.
I liked Harry Potter too. I read all of the books.
Yeah, and I don't even like generally fantasy, so I was a hard sell to get started on them. But actually, my wife and I both worked at the Ayn Rand Institute in those days, and so she would just read them to me on our commute through Southern California traffic every morning and every afternoon, and that's how I read them, which was a really fantastic way.
Don. So sweet.
Allison, thank you for your super chat. Says, would Rand be a Hufflepuff, Slytherin, Gryffindor, or Ravenclaw? This is an important question.
This is important.
I
don't know, but here's what I know for sure is that you would have to put the Sorting Hat on her to find out the answer to that question, and we can't do that. So I don't know if it's answerable.
That is true. People debate
the only one
this.
that knows. I'm not the Sorting Hat. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, Yeah, I mean, if you could just tell by looking at somebody, you wouldn't need a sorting hat. So that's a I think a really important point. If you come away from today's episode with anything, come away from it. It's an illegitimate question to ask what house somebody would be in if they have not actually sat under the sorting hat. Mary Aline, thanks again. Jason says, not me, but one of the most stupid ones. I think he's referring to the question he's about to ask. Or the statement. She has some good ideas, but because of her upbringing, she's going to be biased against the communists. I think this is actually a really good point in that so many pieces on her and even some biographies kind of treat it as, well, she suffered under the communists and that explains her anti-communism. And like,
Yeah.
I mean,
there's a sense in which that's true, right? I mean, in that she experienced it firsthand, so she's going to have an opinion about it. That makes sense. But it's not the case that it was like some automatic foregone conclusion that she grew up a certain way and then she was going to have a certain view because of it. Right? And that's not, I mean, she was examined her views in her life and what she thought. So
yeah, I mean, to put it a different way, did everybody who grew up under the communists therefore be biased against the communists? No, and indeed,
it's probably the opposite.
Yeah, well, I mean, she had a really tragic encounter with her sister. So one of the most Googled ones I didn't mention was, did she have sisters or brothers and sisters? She had two sisters, one of whom died, but in old age, she reconnected with her youngest sister who came to the US from the Soviet Union and basically had been so corrupted by the system that she hated America and returned. And it was a really tragic, and from Ayn Rand's perspective, falling out that they had. And it just goes to show, like, it's like the people say, like, oh, I smoke because my parents smoked. Well, yeah, but I met a lot of people say I didn't smoke because my parents smoked, and like I didn't want to, have that. It's your environment exposes you to things, and it's your judgment that decides what you take away from that. Certainly, I think Ayn Rand's upbringing exposed her to the evils of communism up close and personal, but it was her thinking that led her to see those as evils rather than, oh, these are steps to some future utopia or something like that. Will asks, thanks, Will, what novels do you recommend if I liked Atlas Shrugged? Yeah, people ask that, but I mean, my only answer is other Ayn Rand novels. I mean, it depends on what you get out of them, right? Because that's what you really want to ask is a more fine-grained question. So it's not like, if you like Atlas, what else should you read? Because then I think the only answer is Ayn Rand. But if it's you like the larger-than-life heroes and kind of amazing plots like Victor Hugo, if you like novels that wrestle with ideas, there's some of that in Hugo, but like Dostoevsky is going to be a better answer. If you like novels about like businessmen who are badasses, I don't really know how to help you. Maybe there's been some, but nothing's coming to mind. But that's how I would think about it, is like try to break that down into more specificity. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, like I'd love to recommend something, but it's true, without that extra bit of like, what is it that you were looking for? It's hard to say what you might like after you read Atlas Shrugged.
Yeah,
but I get that too. There's like a longing for, this was good, I want to read something more that like gives me that same kind of feeling. Yeah.
Well, I always get that, like, and this is the problem, right? You fall in love with something that's like really innovative, and then it's like, oh, I want more stuff like that. And then it doesn't exist because this is like new or unique or whatnot. I mean, I just had this happen where I just finished rewatching Stranger Things, and I was like, oh man, I'm in the mood for more of that. And it's like, yeah, but everything else is just like a crappier version of that, or just very different. I mean, Stranger Things is like even not the best example, right? Because like they are self-consciously helping us relive things like the Goonies or whatever. So I can go, I could go rewatch the Goonies or Stand By Me or something like that. But yeah, I mean, in the end, it's really hard to find things.
That is actually a really good idea though, Don, because Netflix, when you watch something, it's like, you might also like this. So just find that service for books, read Atlas Shrugged on there, and then see what the robot recommends, because it's probably something you'd like.
Well, I think there's even a website that kind of does that too. Like it, uses kind of, I forget like where it pulls the data from, but it's like, if you like this, you'll like that. I've never had luck with those things. For me, the best thing is just always like, all right, just tell me something else. Like people who are good at recommending, recommend me something. And in fact, I did an interview on this channel with the co-founder of the app Thoughtful, Brian Emeridge, that Thoughtful should help give you good recommendations. So, all right, we're getting to the end of our time. So with that, thank you, Kenny. So thank you all of our super chatters. You guys are awesome. And, Ayn Rand had the collective, and Harry Binswanger has told me like there was also people who are like considered the junior collective. So they were just outside the inner circle. So you guys are the junior collective of the Thursday Collective. Take that as praise and not an insult. Coming up today at, is it 22:30 UK time? Is it 22:30? The only reason I'm hesitating, guys, is because I'm supposed to be on this show. And
it says 2200 underneath that. So I think it's.
Oh, okay, good. All right. I need to learn to continue reading. So 10 p.m. UK time, Life on Earth with Robert and Amy Nasser. They'll be interviewing me. So I will be back on the channel, and we'll be talking about alliances and how to form them. This is, I don't know what they'll ask me, but certainly don't expect this to be about like objectivist alliances and infighting. That's not what I think we're going to cover, but we're just going to cover like how can you build kind of the best relationships, and how can you within and beyond a subculture like the objectivist movement. And that should be a super interesting discussion. In the meantime, we will be back next week. Thank you very much to my wonderful co-host, Amanda Maxim. Amanda, appreciate it. And we'll talk next time. See you guys in a few hours.
Bye.